Right, what about this? Because one thing I thought was quite interesting was, since there's been a bunch of roster moves and stuff, I want to get people's like vibe on where the actual best teams are, because I feel like the rankings that people have had the last few months, especially from the last VCT, are just irrelevant now. Like it's a totally new world if you look at all the squads. So what about this then? One team we've barely talked about on this show, just because they were going through the whole transition with bringing in DDK and Sean Gedd stuff, was obviously the Luminosity, the 100 Thieves team rather, because they didn't have a lineup, and then B, no one knew if they'd be good, no one even knew if they'd qualify for VCT, but they're here now, and it seems like they're actually building some hype. So Elevated, what do you think roughly of the 100 Thieves team? I think, for example, can they be the best NA team, do you think?
I don't think they're quite there to be able to like knock Optic off the top of it, but I really think that they could compete for that second slot. They're a team that to me has looked like they benefit very heavily from the structure of this group stage where you get a week between your games, because when you have this coaching staff that involves, Mike's and DDK and Sean, like that's a lot of brain power to work on like just counter-stratting a team and breaking down everything. And it showed like pretty heavily, I think, in a lot of their games where they just like absolutely blast people on their map picks. They come up with some like really weird, innovative strategies that look really good. And, aside from like they're kind of stumbled at TSM, which was a very strange loss, in my opinion. They've looked really good against basically every other team that they've played. And just the improvement from week to week has been really apparent, which means that, going into the playoffs, they should make another jump. The only problem that I have with them is that they are kind of a young, inexperienced team where I come from like a traditional sports background where I played like in college and stuff like that. And I know what pressure feels like when
you played baseball, right?
Yeah. And the pressure of like having one game to either like end your season or, go for a big tournament it's going to make you play way differently. And a lot of these players have not been proven. Asuna has performed on stage, but a lot of the other players are like, facing their first really serious challenge, it seems like. And also you kind of have to factor in the weight of like playing for 100 Thieves. This is an org that is not afraid to like spend hundreds of thousands of dollars bringing in players, cutting people very quickly, making big sweeping changes. So, if you're like a 19, 20-year-old kid and that's like playing in the back of your mind a little bit as you're playing the game, you're going to have some problems. So I think they have very high potential, but I do think that the experience thing is going to be a very big determining factor about how they perform in the playoffs.
I think it's very important that they have made it to playoffs, because I totally agree with you about the whole point about like the pressure that comes with playing for an org that have a proven track record of just cutting people. And that's the thing that if I were in the shoes of the players who are playing for the team right now, I would be shit scared of, because Nadeshot has done it multiple times at this point in 2022.
They've even done it like rotating door style, haven't they? They don't even just cut the whole team. They cut sort of one at a time.
Kind of. My hope, and obviously I don't know because I don't really know what goes on behind the scenes, but my hope is that 100 Thieves are pretty much know that they're going to get into the franchise league and therefore don't need to panic so much about staying in the game. That is my hope, and therefore like there may be a little bit more sort of comfort in that, but also the fact that they've done pretty well this stage. I mean, if you mentioned that their loss to TSM was a little bit peculiar. They beat Xset, who came top of their group, but then they also lost to Ghost. So the fact that they are third behind those two teams does kind of make sense. It almost feels like they're in their, let's say, rightful place. They've made it to the playoffs. They are working on some consistent trajectory. They haven't changed their roster halfway through the stage, which is a nice thing. Yeah, right, a nice thing to go with. And I think that there is a lot of, not even just from the org, but also culturally in the scene, a lot of trust in particularly what Sean can do as a coach, right? And I think that brings kind of a new environment, at least from what it appears to be externally, and I would assume internally as well. And yeah, sure, like going through the playoffs and facing a team that's not in their group, it's going to be a new thing to face. They're going to be going against FaZe Clan for their first game, and then assuming they win that, they'll be going against Xset again. And so it's going to be really about like adapting rather than like showing new things necessarily. But I think the really big thing with 100 Thieves is like, if we go back to what some of the major criticisms were about this team previously, a lot of them were just about like people were on uncomfortable roles. Like they wanted to play around Asuna, but like Asuna is not an opper. Asuna is a rifler. And yet he was being forced to be in this op role because no one else that was in the team could fill that role. And so there was already this feeling of discomfort surrounding this team, and coming into this stage, there was this knowledge that that was part of what was aiming to be fixed by the team, and to have, Sean, Mike's, DDK as the manager, like there was this kind of backroom stuff, reshuffling as well to go with that. You kind of wanted to believe that this was going to be what they commit to. And the fact that it has shown results for me almost makes me feel relieved for these, as you say, kids who've come into this game come into this team, knowing that they're now playing for an organization who has been ruthless in their decision making. It's like knowing that they've made it to playoffs makes me feel relieved for their sake.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I really do think that the role thing was like the biggest problem with the 100 Thieves teams in the past. And this one definitely feels the most comfortable for everybody, I think, that's playing on the team, which is it's like unbelievably important in this game. If you're a CSGO fan, I'm not a huge CSGO watcher, but like the role thing is like unbelievably important in like MOBA games and like Overwatch and Valorant. And so if you can just focus on like, setting up your teammates every single round, you have a lot less brain power to think about like communication and the calls and like the macro strategy, because some of the mechanic stuff is a little bit more natural and like muscle memory. And so that's definitely really important with this team. I think that the FaZe matchup is actually maybe the best matchup that we could have for 100 Thieves in the first round, because FaZe is a team that has these like absurd peaks and troughs in their performance, and they're a team that plays insanely aggressively. So it's going to be the perfect litmus test for 100 Thieves, because if they can withstand the pressure of Baby Bay and Dicey literally just like running at your face every single round and potentially dropping 30, 40 kills on a map, if you can withstand that and beat them, then suddenly that's a big confidence boost, because you can kind of handle a style that's not your style, and then you're going to go up against a team like Xset in the next round. It's a little bit more by the book, I guess, is what I would call Xset. And
it's known quantity.
Yeah, exactly.
By the way, one thing I wanted to ask Gio is, in Valorant, is it also the case, because as you're saying about like swapping around even like the main weapon, your rifle, your main rather, is it the case that like oppers are all just oppers permanently? Because in CSGO, essentially, like that's a role where plenty of people, like if you have to cut a player, you might temporarily have a player take over the op, but like they're just going to get destroyed by all the best oppers, because it's one of those roles, because it's such a binary weapon. It's like if you're not quite as good as like the top 10 players in the world at that role, you're just going to get eaten alive. So it's generally a role a bit like IGL, where temporarily people swap, but usually it's advised you don't do that. Yeah, you need to either commit to be you're just that player from now on, or you just do it and you get another player in the spot.
I think if you're lucky, you'll have two people on the team who can do it.
Right.
But I don't think that's like the norm or something that can necessarily be relied upon for most teams. I think in most cases, you're going to have one person on the team that everybody understands that they are the primary person for that role. And there may be certain instances or certain comps that you're running or whatever where actually you flex someone else into it, kind of like what you were just saying, like you might flex someone else into an IGL role, but it's not a permanent thing.
Yes.
There are some teams where it's like, cool, we have two people who can do this role. That's sick. So we have that. And they may have different styles of opping as well. It might be like one person's a really aggressive opper and they're used to playing like Jet or whatever. One person is used to playing Chamber and they've come off of a Sentinel role and therefore they play a more passive opper. And we use what we need to use in that instance. But for the most part, yes, I would say that the opper has to be somebody who is specifically expected to excel in that role and is good at it. And that is one of the problems that 100 Thieves had, is that Asuna was being put into that role and expected to op because he was their Jet player. There was no one else on the team who was necessarily qualified to be an opper. And that's just not what Asuna's built for. It's not that he was a bad opper, but he wasn't good enough to go up against the other oppers in NA. Like, you put 100 Thieves against Optic, like, Ye is gonna beat him like 99 times out of 100 in those 1v1s. So like, I think that's the thing, is like, he can be a good opper, but is he a good enough opper? And that's what you need. You need that person on your team who is the good enough opper, who can take those duels and is expected to. And that's the problem 100 Thieves had.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.